Recuérdame tu título.
En inglés,
Sí.
the Chief Latam Economist at Barclays.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us once again. I appreciate all of you who've been joining us throughout the years. We've been on the air almost 20 years now, broadcasting Living in Mexico from Grupo Imagen every weekend, with very few exceptions. We've been able to provide you information, news, analysis about what's going on in Mexico, both in English and in Spanish. So once again, I want to thank all of you who've been joining us throughout the years. And I really appreciate you joining us this weekend because, boy, it was an interesting weekend, a roller coaster, especially if you are following the world markets and even the Mexican peso devaluated. There was a lot of concern. There was different explanations as to what was happening this week. That's why, once again, I want to thank Gabriel Casillas. He's the chief economist at Barclays Bank. He's joining us from New York. Thank you once again, Gabriel, for joining us today. Could you just, I'm almost having trouble trying to describe what happened this week. It was such a long week, but we started out, I believe it was on Monday, with just the markets plummeting around the world. So just give us a brief description as to what happened, and then you have to tell us why. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. Always very glad to be in your show. Congratulations for almost 2 decades here on the air. I've been married for 21 years, so it's pretty much, what it has lasted. So congratulations.
You have a long marriage, and I've been on radio for quite a long time. Welcome to the show.
No, thank you very much, Ana Maria. So, it was a long week indeed. On Wednesday, 2 of the traders actually in the trading floor, they asked me, what day is today? So whenever you see that, is that something is not going well. So yeah, we saw a roller coaster, and there were 2 main things that happened that actually, triggered all these market volatility. Number one, the Bank of Japan. Last week, they hiked rates for the very first time in a long time. And as you know, a lot of market participants for years have been, borrowing money in yen at 0% rates, and they have been investing those monies in different risk assets, such as even Japanese stock market, U.S. stock market, Mexican pesos, euros, and other currencies. So imagine that now the rates where you're borrowing money go up, and on the other hand, we had the employment report in the U.S. Showing signals of slowdown. So imagine the U.S. economy has been the economy of the developed markets that has been growing the most, and now it's starting to showing weakness. So what could happen? So on the one hand, if there's some weakness on economic activity, companies listed in the stock markets are not going to be able to give you the dividends or the earnings that you're expecting. And on the other hand, usually the Fed starts cutting rates. So the more, where you put the money is going down or giving you less, and where you borrow the money is actually charging more. So usually this is the perfect storm to have in a market these days. So these 2 things trigger everything, because in a roller coaster, it hasn't been only volatility going down. We have seen also some recovery. At the end, this is the usual thing. When something like this happens, everybody's like, "Oh, let's get out of here," and then suddenly, but the Fed is gonna cut rates, and this is gonna be great. So we're living in a very fast pace, like the first part of risk aversion, and then the second part where people are like, but the Fed is gonna cut rates. So this is what happened in markets. I hope I explained it well.
Oh, perfectly well. In fact, which raises the question as to whether the decision made this week by the Bank of Mexico, which was to reduce rates, was the correct decision. I know there were some analysts that were surprised. Some have expressed concern, but was it the right decision?
I think so. I think it was the right decision, definitely. Not because I was expecting it, but I think even if I was not calling for it, I would say it was the right decision. Why? Because, okay, like 6 months, a year ago, inflation actually was around the same levels as right now. Headline inflation was at 5.6. We're there, no? In July, that was inflation number. But core inflation, as you know, the one that excludes the volatile items where monetary policy doesn't have a lot of influence, like tomato prices or chayote prices that increase like 500%, lemons, onions, eggs. So that inflation, core inflation, was very high a year ago, and nowadays it's at 4%. It's its lowest in more than 3 years. So, but more importantly here, economic activity. A year ago, economic activity was going well. Right now, we have had several signals of weakness, not only in the US, but Mexico. And actually, Mexico, it's not new. We have had economic weakness since Q3 in 23, since the third quarter of 23. We thought it was transitory, but then it continued in the first quarter. And they say, okay, maybe the second quarter is going to be a strong one because we have all these, government spending and all the electoral spending, etc. It was weak as well. So we have had several signals of weakness, even employment, number of workers raised, the Social Security. We have had 3 monthly declines in the number of employees raised the AMSS. And this is something we don't see usually in the first half of the year. So this is usually more like in a recession scenario. We're not yet there, but there's weakness. So, and weakness is reflecting now in core inflation. So even though some costs like onions are increasing, now it's not so easy for the taquerias to transfer the higher cost to consumers because the economy is weaker. And also in this context, what do you do? Well, depends also on what's the level of interest rates. We're in the highest levels, I'm not going to say ever, because you and I know that in the 90s rates were above 100%. But, the reference rate of Banco de Mexico started in 2008. So if we take that like a starting point, 11.25% was the highest ever. So we're at a very high level of interest rate. So it's good to lower them. I mean, it's not good. It's not gonna alleviate the economy or anything like that. But there's no reason why to have such high interest rates. So it was the right decision, and I'm glad they did.
I guess then let's start talking about then what should the first let me ask you, what is your view in terms of what the rest of the year is going to look like, and take us to January, where in January we're going to have a new president sworn in. She would have been sworn in at least 2-3 months because she will be sworn in on October 1st. So we'll have a new president, and we will know who the next president of the United States is going to be, which I think is also important to highlight, which can define many things as to what Mexico's economy is going to look like, and what Mexico's relationship with its partner, the United States, is going to how is it going to develop the next upcoming years. So we will know by January some of the answers. So just kind of walk us through what the rest of the year is going to look like.
Okay. No, we just had a very long week, and you want me to walk you through January? Just kidding. Now let me go. Let me go fast. So I mean, number one, I think that in terms of Mexico, September, I am not very constructive September, to say the least. September will have a very toxic combo, because we will have.
About September.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Worried about September. So a very toxic combo. On the one hand, we'll have the U.S. election in full-fledged campaign, and we're going to have candidate Trump, using a negative rhetoric against Mexico as he loves to do it. And more so, the big issue in the U.S., at least in my personal point of view, is immigration. So, of course, Mexico, it's not problem number 1. It's not problem number 2. Probably it's not problem number 15. You have Israel, you have Russia, you have China. I mean, Mexico is not number 1 or 2. I don't think it will make it to the top 10. But for the citizen in the street, for Main Street, as I'm saying, definitely immigration is an issue. So we're going to see that. And the toxic combo is not only that. It's going to come with the reform, with AMLO's let's say, market unfriendly reform approval process, in which, as we know, we have also the judicial reform, among others. None of those reforms are really positive for Mexico, and market participants are concerned about that. So imagine that toxic combo. And on top of that, even though the reforms, market participants don't like them, is that there's some complacency. A lot of market participants say, oh, they're so bad, they're not going to be approved, they're going to be diluted, watered down. And I think that's not going to happen. So there's a lot of room for disappointment there. And imagine those two things. So people have high expectations. On the one hand, you're going to have this reform approval process. On the other hand, you're going to have Trump bashing Mexico. So it's going to be a bad September. However, you were mentioning October 1st. So some market participants, when they hear me saying October 1st, they think October Fest. But no, I'm not talking about, having beers, in a garden in Germany. No, it's October 1st, the inauguration, the first day of October, where we will have Claudia Sheinbaum inauguration. And we are very constructive on that. And I think market participants are somewhat constructive on Claudia Sheinbaum. They want to see things happening, no? And I think the three things, at least, that market participants want to see from Claudia at the very beginning are, number one, fiscal consolidation, from the 6% deficit that we probably are going to end this year to something between 3 and 4%. Then the second, they want to hear a holistic plan for Pemex, because it's a fiscal burden nowadays. And number three, they want a good appointment to replace Deputy Governor Irene Espinosa. She will end her term on December 31st this year. So we're not getting to January, but I think these are the most important things. And then, of course, we have the election on November 5th. And then, we'll see who's going to be president. And then January will be the inauguration of the U.S. president. And I think, honestly, regardless of who wins, I think the problem for Mexico is more during the campaign rather than during the government. Because during the campaign, Mexico is problem number one, immigration, organized crime, imports of fentanyl. Right. But once it becomes, president, whoever wins, then we're not problem number one. No, so in this context, I am pretty constructive of whoever wins. Of course, I'm more constructive with one of the candidates, of course, I must say. But definitely, I think that once we get the president, is not going to be as bad as during the campaign.
So, did I hear you correctly? But it seems that if all goes well, there will not be a recession in the United States, but there will be something of a soft landing in 2025. Is that what what are your views in terms of what the U.S. economy is going to look like next year, which of course is very important for the Mexican economy. It's important for the global economy. But in terms of, this first year for President Claudia Sheinbaum, to initiate with a crisis, an economic crisis, even though she may try to make the best decisions, could be catastrophic.
Yeah. Well, like three things here. Number one, I think President Biden has been one of the best presidents in the U.S. has had, not only because, how many legislation he has been able to pass, good legislation, but also, in terms of economic management, has been great. Of course, fiscally, the deficit has increased, debt has increased, but, come on, that has happened, for many decades now. Now, one important thing, the dream of a macroeconomist, starting with John Maynard Keynes, back in the 30s or in the 20s, was how a government can act, without being communist or anything, but how can the government, smooth the economic cycle and allow the economy to, if it's going through a slowdown, that the slowdown is not that bad, no? To have this, slow landing or soft landing. So far, it seems that the U.S. economy is doing it. It would be one of the very first times, or not the very first time, but there have been very few times in history that this has happened. But, the employment report in July that I was talking about, it would send signals of weakness, but there were not many layoffs. It was just slowdown in the creation of jobs. So that's a completely different story. So maybe the U.S. economy is going to be able to have this soft landing, and this, of course, will help the global economy, as you mentioned, and Mexico. No? So that's the idea here, and that's how I think things will go. Now, we have the Fed that probably will start cutting rates in September, and that will be another way to soothe market participants' concerns and the economy as well. No? So that's the idea. That's what I think about the U.S. economy in general.
Well, I hope you're right, because it just seems, of course, we're not considering other like regional crisis that is taking place in other parts of the world. I mean, I assume the markets have kind of assimilated the Ukraine-Russian war and of course what's happening in the Middle East. So, I mean, and it's hard to look towards the future until we understand what's going to happen with these two crises and the impact, for example, it could have on the price of oil. People are talking about Venezuela. How is that going to resolve in the next couple of if it is going to be resolved in the next couple of weeks? Could that impact the price of oil, and how could that impact the world economy? So there are a couple of crises out there that I believe we should be paying attention to. Which one concerns you the most?
All of them are very important.
Pretty bad.
I think, yeah, but let me tell you, I mean, the world in our view is experiencing still the aftermath of three major shocks. The pandemic, the war in Ukraine, particularly, as well as the policy. I mean, policy is not considered usually a shock, but it was a shock this time because it was unprecedented, synchronized, fiscal and monetary. So these three shocks are happening at the same time as we're living in three like global long-term trends: population aging, climate change, and deglobalization. So imagine this cocktail. It's quite toxic. So if you put all these things together, of course, the world is experiencing a very, very interesting times in the Chinese sense, no? So it is tough. And what I'm trying to say here, it's what I'm more concerned the most is that how are we going to navigate these troublesome trends with these shocks? So far.
So you're focused more on thinking in terms of you're looking at the long term, and the long term phenomena and crisis. Maybe is that what you're saying? I mean,
yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. And two important things here. For example, the situations like in the Middle East, they are terrible, very sad, and usually the problem there is that they could derail, the way you are navigating. It's like if you're in a wire, walking on a wire, and then of course it's tough already, and then you have a lot of strong winds that could derail your walking in the wire, no? So these are the things that concern me in terms of like shorter term things. Although of course in the Middle East we have had problems for in the longer run. And then the other, the deglobalization, it's happening. I don't think there's a way back. I mean, there is, but I don't see any.
When you say that, could you just define exactly what you mean, deglobalization?
Yeah, well, I think it started with the issues between U.S. and China, during the Trump administration. But this has not only been U.S. China. You have started to see some allegiance or regionalization of trade with China and some partners now partnering with Russia as well. Then we saw the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, so that had exacerbated these things. And it's not only about trade. Now it's about technology, it's about security, it's about so many things. No, so in this context, I don't see any willingness from any politician in either China, Russia, the U.S. to de-escalate this. No, so probably we'll continue there in this trend. So these are the things that really concern me. Climate change concerns me. Take a look at what the natural disasters are increasing at a pace and at a magnitude that we couldn't be thinking about that. So if you put aging of the population, a population that now is able to live more, and it's not prepared for that in terms of the health habits and the money that governments will have to spend on health and caring for the elderly. So there's a bunch of things that at the end I'm optimistic, I must say, because technology, we have AI, we have many things in technology that could help us to live through that in a better fashion. Maybe satellites controlling the weather, but I'm not gonna go there. But the thing is, at the end, I'm optimistic. But in the meantime, the longer term trends are the ones that concern me. And if we're living a complex world and we have issues like the Middle East that they tend to escalate and things like that, but they can derail all this what we're experiencing. And in Venezuela and oil, I mean, the thing is, oil is important on the margin. No? I mean, the marginal producer is the one that determines the price. But Venezuela, they were able to produce 3 million up to 3.5 million barrels per day, like 15 years ago, and now they're producing like 500,000 barrels a day. So It is important. It's an important production, but it's very small, and they have not invested in several years. So in order to boost, production in Venezuela, it will take major investments. It will take years. And nowadays, of course, those 500,000 barrels a day are important, but they are not as important as they used to.
Right. Wow. Well, with that, with that last comment, once again, I really appreciate you joining us. And of course, we're going to be following very closely what happens the next couple of weeks and what's going to happen in September. It sounds like it's going to be a shock, and it's going to be rough, and it's going to be interesting to see how President-elect Claudia Sheinbaum does this transition in a way that she doesn't start her administration with a major economic crisis, in part and due to decisions being made by outgoing President Manuel Lopez Obrador, which is unfortunate for her. I really appreciate you joining us, Gabriel Casillas. He is the chief economist for Latin America at Barclays. He's joining us from New York. Once again, thank you so much for joining us here on Living in Mexico.
Always a pleasure, Ana Maria. Take care, and greetings to all the people who have followed your show for many years as well.
Thank you. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Please don't go away. I'll be right back.